Recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.R. 788, the so-called Stop Settlement Slush Funds Act of 2023. This harmful legislation would prevent the Justice Department from negotiating settlements to include payments to third parties, primarily nonprofits and community-based organizations that are best positioned to remedy harms to society at large that were caused by a corporate wrongdoer's violation of federal environmental, labor, consumer, and financial protections. This bill is nothing short of a gift to large corporations that would leave victims of their misconduct out in the cold. No credible facts justify H.R. 788. This bill is based on the false premise that the Justice Department uses these types of settlements as illegitimate favors for an administration's political allies, with the bill's supporters describing such settlements as politically motivated slush funds. This is an outlandish attack on a perfectly legal and constitutional type of remedy, and is an argument that both the Government Accountability Office and the Congressional Research Service have thoroughly debunked. Yet House Republicans have spent countless hours and taxpayer dollars over several Congresses, going back at least a decade, chasing the conspiracy theory that the Justice Department is attempting to fund liberal activist groups and causes through negotiated settlements. This included the multi-year investigation of the settlements that the Justice Department entered into with several big banks following the 2008 financial crisis. Banks whose greedy appetite for mortgage-backed securities led to predatory lending practices that ultimately left millions of homeowners facing foreclosure. The big banks turned a blind eye to these practices while they packaged mortgages that they knew were of questionable value as securities and sold them to individual and institutional investors alike. Although the big banks' illegal conduct led directly to the 2008 financial crisis, it was difficult, if not impossible, for individual borrowers or homeowners to hold them legally accountable for the harms that they suffered from the bank's near implosion of the nation's financial system. In response, roughly 1%, a tiny fraction of the settlement monies and suits brought by the government, ultimately went to third-party organizations specializing in aiding private homeowners to obtain mortgage relief or other related community services, a perfectly reasonable way to help remedy the harm caused by these large financial institutions' irresponsible behavior. Unsurprisingly, the House Republican investigation into these settlements produced not one shred of credible evidence to support their allegations that this represented some sort of improper action, a common result when it comes to the majority's oversight priorities, it seems. Nonetheless, the majority seeks to enact H.R. 788, a bill that purports to address a problem that does not exist, while its proposed solution would create real negative consequences for the American public. Were Congress to pass H.R. 788, it would reward corporate lawbreakers and further victimize the families and communities suffering from the consequences of corporate misconduct, including injuries from civil rights violations, environmental justice harms, or harms caused by fraudulent lending practices. During the Rules Committee hearing earlier this week, my colleagues on the other side began to argue that these settlements are in fact a sweet deal for corporate lawbreakers at the expense of the taxpayer. Nothing could be further from reality. First, let us not lose sight of the fact that the majority of settlement funds go to the U.S. Treasury. Second, these settlements enable federal agencies to efficiently resolve enforcement actions. In many of the kinds of cases from which these types of settlements arise, litigation is complex, expensive, and time-consuming. It could take the government years to hold wrongdoers accountable if they are unable to reach a settlement. Justice delayed is justice denied. These settlements save the taxpayers millions of dollars in litigation costs, boosting the value of the settlement to the U.S. Treasury beyond the listed dollar figure, while at the same time providing more immediate relief for victims of corporate lawbreaking. H.R. 788 is simply a tired attempt by the majority to paint the constitutional veneer upon their unpopular anti-regulatory agenda, which includes enacting legislation that will undermine critical financial, environmental, public health, and safety protections for the American public. This anti-regulatory bill is a solution in search of a problem, designed to serve deep-pocketed corporate interests at the American people's expense. It is a shame that House Republicans have chosen this unjustified and harmful bill as one of their first measures to bring to the floor in this new year. We could have started the new year by considering bipartisan legislation to address the real problem. At the same markup where the Judiciary Committee considered this bill, we also considered legislation that would have addressed bipartisan concerns about federal civil asset forfeiture laws. That bill passed the committee by a 26-0 vote in favor, and I have no doubt that it would have enjoyed strong bipartisan support on the floor. But here we are, once again at the precipice of a possible government shutdown, and House Republicans have chosen instead to waste time on H.R. 788, recycling an unnecessary bill that has no chance of passage in the Senate at a time when the House should be working expeditiously to ensure that the government stays open. In short, rather than considering ill-conceived and harmful legislation, we ought to be devoting this first legislative week of the new year focused on serving the actual needs of the American people, the basic job that we were elected to do. I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 788, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman.